One of the things you'll notice is anytime I reset, I lose my Scene Explorer. I tend to work with it off. It's something you could turn it on and off. You'll also notice that my 3ds Max does not look like the default. That's because I made a Max start scene. Prior to this tutorial, watch the video on creating a Max start scene and create a Max start scene so that you have all the proper presets that I would like you to have for the class. All right, so let's talk about making some objects. We're going to make ourselves a little tree. So I'm going to make perspective active. I'm going to come over here to cone, and I'm just going to click and drag. And once I get kind of a little circle out here, I'm sort of looking up at parameters. I want it to be about 50 units. That's roughly about 50. And then when I release, I'm able to tell it how tall. It's going to go off screen, so why don't I just click right here, and now I'm just going to define if it's a cone, I'm just going to drag it all the way to the center so it's at 0, and then click to finish, and I'm just going to right click to get out of cone creation. At this point I have a basic cone. I'm going to come over here to modify. I'm going to adjust this a little bit. Let's just type in a value of 50 for the radius and give it a height of like 200. And then I'm going to go down to the bottom right, not that one, but the one above it, zoom extents all, click to zoom out. When you go to create an object, do not worry about making the perfect object with your initial creation. Just get the raw materials out and then go to the modify panel and start adjusting it inside of there. Okay, and that's one of the most important things I'm going to tell you. You can drive yourself crazy and really stress yourself out if you try to make the perfect object every single time. All right, so here's the start of my little evergreen tree. So I'm going to come up here to move, click on move. I'm just going to drag this up a little bit in the front view. And now I want to get another cone out there, because now that I've raised the main body up, I want to get a base in. I don't want to make another cone. I'm just going to right click on my model, and down here under transform, I'm going to look for clone. Let's move over to the right and right click. You notice anywhere I right click on the model, I get these two little blue squares, and coming off of that, at the top are display, at the bottom are transform. And that allows me actually to switch between move, rotate, scale, but also gives me this option for clone. When I click on clone, you see I get the clone options. And there's 3 primary types of clones. I'm going to clone as an instance and say okay. And then right click, go into move, and I'm going to lower him down. I want him exactly at 0, so I'm going to come down here to the Z value, enter a value of 0. Now, I want to make its radius smaller, so what I'm going to do is change that. Now, you'll notice that as I change it, both of them change, right? And I don't want them both changing. I want to be able to manipulate this guy on his own. I could just right-click and go into Scale, and grab this handle here in the middle and scale that. And if I want to make it, oops, a little bit more narrow, just grab Y, bring it down. And I could manipulate it that way. If I wanted to be able to control it a little bit more scientifically by manipulating these values, I could click this guy here, which is make unique. Now if I change the values on this, that's it only changes the one object because he's unique. All right, let's select this top of the tree. I'm going to right click and say clone, but I want to keep it as an instance. I'm going to right click and go into move and just raise him up, and then clone and raise him up. I think I'm going to scale him down a little bit. Scale this out a little bit. Oops. I'm going to grab that handle in the center. There we go. Let's zoom in and grab this guy. There we go. Zoom him out a little bit. There we go. So we're just going to manipulate this to kind of get like a little simple looking tree shape happening. There we go. All right. So now I kind of got the start of my evergreen tree. How's he look if we orbit out here? It's not bad. It works. It'll be fine. I can get really nitpicky with it but I'm not going to. So here I have my tree. Right? If we want, now there's plenty of ways to get materials on it. One quick and easy way is just coming up here and clicking in the corner, and you select like a colors there, right? And what that does is that changes the color of the wireframe for the models. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these guys, and I'm going to come up here to the top, say group, and click on the word group. I'm going to give it a name, tree, and I'm going to click OK. Now when I click, it actually selects that tree. I want the handle for the tree to be at the bottom of it though. So I could check by coming up here to Selection Center, clicking and holding on that, and going to the bottom, and that's where its proper pivot is located. Now, I want that pivot to be at the bottom. So I'm going to go now, we've been in Create, went to Modify. Now we're in Hierarchy. In Hierarchy, I'm going to Affect Pivot Only. And I want to go to Move. I'm going to move that pivot all the way down to 0 because I want the pivot at the base of the tree. Now, why would I want that? Because I'm going to right-click on this tree and say Clone as an instance. And then here in the top view, I'm just going to move him over to the side a little bit. And I'm going to go into Scale. I'm going to scale him down. And because his pivot is down at the base of the tree, notice that he's scaling based on that. Right? Based on that location. If I had scaled it from before, it would have just scaled based off of that center location. I'll show you what I mean. Right click, clone. I'm going to change this to a clone as a copy and move them over here. Now if I do Affect Pivot Only, Center to Object, watch what happens when I scale them. It scales based on that pivot location. And so I want to be able to adjust, knowing that I can go to Hierarchy and say Affect Pivot Only, and change it, move that pivot around is very powerful. Right? So I can make this tree a little bit taller, and then I can right-click, clone it as a copy, right-click, go to Move, move him over, and I can go back into Scale, and I can clone him again, go to Move him over, right-click and scale, move them again. Now I'm using that right-click transform to easily, quickly access move. Move is also up here. The same with rotate and scale. Like those are all easily available. Just like edit clone is also located up at the top. Move him over. All right. So here I have the start of a little forest. And you know what? I'm going to grab all these and say group, and group them again and say forest cluster 1. And now when I click, you see they're all here. And you can see that over in my Scene Explorer, you can see that there's these groups that they're made up of. And it's expanded to show you kind of the hierarchy structure, the parent, which is the giant forest, and then the individual ones underneath it. And like anything in most things in Max, you can expand and contract and collapse that. I'm going to right click and say clone, and then I'll go into rotate. Sometimes it's easier to go into rotate up here and then move it over, clone as a copy. You can also, your keyboard works for changing between the different types. Q will switch you to select, W is move, E is rotate, and then R, if we clone this again as a copy, move it back over here, R is going to be scale. Now every time I hit R, it's going to switch between the different scale types. Remember, I mentioned before, uniform, non-uniform, and squash and stretch. Also notice, I didn't have you do this before, but when I made another group, it centered that pivot. So I'm going to go Affect Pivot Only, make sure I'm in Move, and I'm going to set the Z value to 0. So now when I scale them, right, funnily enough, he's on squash and stretch. Let's click and hold to get to regular scale. We'll just scale him up a little bit, make him a little bit taller. place some of these in the background. Rotate them a little bit more. Right click, clone, okay, and move it around. Get one more in there. All right. So we could keep doing this. We can keep going and say group, group, right? And slowly build up our forest that way. Really, I just wanted to show you a number of different ways to go through and get you familiar with some of the fun stuff in 3D. The fact that everything is repeatable and accessible like this is very fun, very useful. If you wanted to get like a ground plane out there, you can just go to plane, and if I click and drag, now I have a surface. And remember, if you click on the plus sign, you can turn off your grid. Click a negative space, and now you have a little forest scene for yourselves that you kind of built, which is something you can feel good about. Feel good for making this. All right, well, there you go. That's grouping and cloning inside of 3ds Max.